I'm Dr. Walter Tsu. I'm going to talk today about heat pumps and how it directly or indirectly affects our health. And my goals today are to talk a little bit about heat pumps themselves, a little bit about the basics and the types of heat pumps. Then I'll talk a little bit more about electrification and renewable energy. Then look at the health benefits of clean energy itself, and then the bigger picture of about how we could use this as ways to slow climate change. Before we install heat pumps, I have questions that I would ask anybody, and this I'm only going to talk about residential, not commercial heat pumps. But questions, like how leaky is your home? How airtight is it? How uh, energy efficient is it? Because even if you were to put a heat pump into your house, if your house is very leaky and doesn't really matter, it won't really save you a whole lot of electricity or do very much for the climate. So maybe the first thing is actually weatherproofing or making sure you have better windows and insulation in your house. Another question to think about is whether you have ducts in your house, or if your house is like my house, which is radiators, whether you have no ducts, because that has some bearing in terms of what kind of units you would buy. How cold is your climate? So in Philadelphia, you know, rarely we might get down to 5 degrees or something. Usually, we're around freezing. But if you're in Minnesota, it might be a little bit more of a challenge to do heat pumps. Um, and then finally, do you have qualified HVAC installers in your area? Because it's kind of like Goldilocks. You can't buy a heat pump that's too small, and you shouldn't buy one that's too big. You have the one that's really just right. And if it's not properly sized, you're going to be wasting electricity. And since this is an investment that could last you for 25 years, it's a major home improvement, and you really have to make some careful decisions and have a qualified person install this stuff. So the different types of heat pumps include things like air source, split ductless, geothermal, and water source, and I'm going to talk about each of those. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit about how can heat pumps work in cold weather. So this actually has to do with the chemistry of the refrigerants that are used. So we're most familiar with water, of course, and water turns into a steam or gas at 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees centigrade. Our refrigerators have refrigerants that actually turn into gas around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat pumps are in a totally different order. So the current one that is usually used is R410. It has a boiling point of minus 55 degrees Fahrenheit, which means that even if it's 0 degrees outside and we're cold, for the refrigerant that's used in heat pumps, it's actually really balmy out there, and it will start to vaporize into a gas at 0 degrees centigrade, at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And the newest generation of refrigerants is R32. It's just coming out like now. And these actually have boiling points for minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So the reason why heat pumps can work in cold weather is because the refrigerants that we use actually have a boiling point that is far below what any of us would ever experience in our weather. Based on the principle that when gas expands, molecules will slow down and actually turns cold, is one of the reasons why heat pumps actually can work. So for example, if you were to take a series of molecules and compress them and move them together, the actual molecules start heating up. And if you in turn actually expand where those molecules are and they have more room to, more space, they reduce the amount of kinetic energy and they start to cool down. Well, this principle is how we use this for heat pumps. So normally when you put a hot substance like a hot cup of coffee in a room, it tries to acclimate to room temperature. But you can actually make things worse, if you will, if you were to put pressure on that cup of coffee and it would start to heat up. Um, so here is the simplified version of a heat pump or an air conditioner. It's kind of reversible air conditioner. It takes fresh air from the outside. It actually goes through a filter, and then depending on whether it's in a cooling phase or a heating phase, uh, that even the little heat that we perceive when it's 0 degrees outside, that little bit of heat can actually still heat up that refrigerant, and that actually gets blown and compressed and sent to the coils inside your house, and then it's released through those coils, and that heat from the outside plus whatever heat you use to compress the uh, the refrigerant is actually then released inside your house, and it can heat up your house. And then, of course, that refrigerant, once its heat's been released, it starts to liquefy again and turn to a liquid phase, and it recycles over and over again. And then we can do the same thing in reverse. And all heat pumps that have heating cooling features have a reversible valve that reverses the process. So the most common heat pump that people buy is the air source heat pump because it's the easiest to install. You just put the heat pump outside your house, and if you already have ducts in your house, you can hook the heat pump or the compressor inside your house to your ducts, and then you can send the hot or cold air through the ducts that are already established in your house. And of course, this means that you can provide both heating and cooling. And for Zero, what this also means is that heat pumps turn out to be about 50% more efficient than baseboard electric heating. So actually, it does save money in electricity, and it can work in cold and hot weather. And it can use this to heat and cool your entire house through the ducts that you have. But one of the things that you have to think about is that air source heat pumps, as compared to the other heat pumps that I'll be talking about, actually use much more electricity because air has much more extremes in weather. So when it's really hot outside or really cold outside, the heat pump, air source heat pump, has to be able to adjust, and it requires a lot more electricity to do cooling when it's hot and heating when it's cold. So all that is to say that you can use air source heat pumps. Usually those extremes are not that prevalent, but it's also much more efficient if you use it in a well-insulated house. So what happens if you don't have ducts in your house? Well, in that case, you can buy these ductless heat pumps. They're called splits or mini splits. And you can actually have uh, the unit itself outside the house, and then it feeds to the compressor, which then is in each of the different rooms. You can have like 1 to 4 different rooms, and they work by remote control. And since there's no duct work, there's no loss of heat or cold, which can amount to about 30% of the actual energy lost through the duct work. The real problem, of course, is that you have to drill a hole through your wall to put this mini split uh, uh, unit inside your house or inside the rooms. And it's a lot of work depending on how many rooms you have in your house. It could be actually cost prohibitive to put all these little mini splits inside your home. So that's also another consideration. Now, what would happen if we didn't have air as the source for the heat pump, but maybe something that had a more constant temperature, like it turns out the ground? If you dig a hole 300, 400 feet into the ground, it turns out that the ground has a constant temperature around 50 degrees. No matter how hot it is outside or how cold it is outside, it stays around that temperature. Well, you can take advantage of that by actually digging a deep hole, and we call those geothermal heat pumps. And then the uh, the refrigerant actually then circulates through through this heat pump that's deep down in the ground. And that has a lot of advantages if you think about it, which we'll talk about in a second. Or maybe not as good as the ground, but water, as we all know, if we go swimming, is cooling during the summer and it stays warm even in the winter. And that also can be a source of a more constant temperature heat source for the heat pump. So the ground itself stays around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which means you use less electricity to heat or cool your home. So it's much more efficient, somewhere between 25 to 50% more efficient. And the ground loops themselves can last like 50 years. And the indoor unit will last longer than any of our gas or oil burners that we have. It could last like 25 years for the indoor unit with virtually no maintenance at all. But of course, there are limitations. And obviously, the most important ones are, do you have enough ground, or do you have a pond or lake near your home where you could actually put such a unit? And then you would have to get permission from your township or the city to do digging. And they're expensive because you have not just like putting an air source heat pump outside your house, you have to do this digging, and it could cost something like $20,000 to $25,000 to put a geothermal heat pump into your house. There is a company called Dandelion Energy. You can look them up. And this company actually does individual geothermal wells. So if you have the land and they're in your area, Dandelion Energy, you could actually ask them if they would put in a geothermal well in your house. It turns out that they still cost somewhere around $15,000 to $20,000 to put in a geothermal well. So it's not cheap, but it's something that if you have the money, it's something you could do individually, and it probably pays itself back in electricity savings over the course of 10 years. This year, if you buy a Energy Star certified heat pump, you'll get $300 back. Not huge, but it's actually something. But it expires at the end of this year. The idea of geothermal, though, actually has some great interest, I think, because it has all the savings, but it's very cost prohibitive. But what if you could actually do this at a community level? Let's suppose you actually build an entire development, a neighborhood, around the concept of geothermal wells. Well, it turns out in Whisper Valley, Texas, outside of Austin, they did exactly that. And I want to show you that video.
Like this, but obviously I see solar. I'm not used to seeing that. Yes, so 18 panels. That's right.
Yes, we do.
Solar system, that kind of solar system is on every house here. So 5 kW handling your lighting, appliances. I mean, it gets hot here in Texas. Is it going to make much of a dent in your cooling load? Good question. So if we would use a conventional air conditioner, we would need much more panels, but we do it differently, and I like to show you how. It's this way. So it's all about infrastructure. So as a developer, we are responsible for building roads, streets, water, sewer, electric services. In our case, we thought, what can we do as a developer to provide an energy efficient source for heating, cooling? We call that source geothermal loop field or geogrid. Okay, so what's a geogrid? It's very simple. The way this works is we have installed a central pumping station, an entire piping system for each neighborhood in our community, with a single main supply and return line that every house in that neighborhood is tied into. And those pipes were installed long before the house is even built? Absolutely correct. This is more cost effective to drill the entire neighborhood all at once, and eventually this entire street will be filled with houses. Each house has a recirculation loop and a pump to call for heating and cooling as it's needed. I mean, that's the magic of geothermal. Outside temperature can go from over 100 degrees in the summer to below freezing in the winter. But what people don't realize is below our feet, we've got consistent temperature that we can tap into. Exactly, very correct. And that happens under this green cover. And each house also has its own borehole that goes down about 360 feet, and it is connected to the central loop, which ensures that every building in this neighborhood gets the same level of heating and cooling. In the winter, when there's a demand for heat, the wells actually pull heat from deep below the ground and send it into the house. And then in reverse, In the summertime, when there's a demand for cooling, the heat is pulled from the house and sent back down under the ground.
So for Whisper Valley, Texas, they charge $65 a month for their geothermal. And depending on the solar panels that you have, you can pay anywhere from $0 to $30 a month for your electricity in the summer, which is actually not bad if you think about if that's true for the next 25 years, and that covers all your heating and electric bills. That's not bad, and certainly a great savings over what I pay for my utilities now. Well, this concept of geothermal is actually limited in some respects because you have to actually do digging this well, and you have to live right next to the geothermal pump. But what happens, let's say, if you're interested in solar and actually providing the electricity for your heat pump, you'd have to find enough land parcels and to actually do something like a community solar project. So in Philadelphia, we have the old Philadelphia Energy Solutions refinery site that could be a place for solar energy. Or as a group that we're working with, the Earthquaker Action Team, they're very interested in having our rooftops in the city. Many of them are flat roofs. They could, if you combine up all the square footage of all those flat roofs, that actually could be a giant solar panel source. It turns out that solar has another interesting feature, which is that you can actually put solar farms far away from where your building is and take the benefits of that. So for example, the city of Philadelphia has purchased a solar farm in Adams County, which is where I show in yellow. It's an 80 megawatts facility, and it will actually power 22% of the electricity of the buildings in Philadelphia. And the University of Pennsylvania did even better. They bought a 220 megawatt solar farm in Franklin County, and they're going to use that electricity then to help power, I forget what percent, like 60 or 70% of Penn. Now the question is, how does that work? Well, it turns out that because of the grid, it doesn't really matter that the electricity is sourced in Adams or Franklin County under solar. As long as that energy gets fed into the grid, you get credit for that solar farm for Penn and for the city of Philadelphia. Which does raise a whole idea that of just like community solar geothermal that we just saw, maybe we could do community solar as an idea. What happens if a bunch of your neighbors got together and said, you know, I really don't want to put a solar panel on my house, but if we bought part of a solar farm in Adams County and then use that electricity and put it into the grid, you could actually benefit from that. And a lot of states actually allow people to do just that, this idea of community solar. But we live in Pennsylvania, and in Pennsylvania, you're not allowed to do that. And the question is, why is that? We cannot do that here in our state. Well, in Pennsylvania, we have this idea of one property, one solar project only. And if we just had community solar, you could conceivably buy all these, buy into a solar farm. But we realize that in our state, the gas industry actually dominates the entire state legislature. Between 2007 and 2018, they gave $69 million in contributions to our state legislators. So they have basically bought them off. And they are not interested in having community solar, which would actually compete against burning natural gas as the power source for electricity. They've also made it difficult for PECO to expand the sources of its electricity. So right now, PECO only is limited to 0.5% solar for its electricity. And PECO has actually requested that continue until the year 2025 in their current petition before the Pennsylvania Utilities Commission. We, along with the Earthquaker Action Team and many other people, have actually written to the PUC commissioners and to PECO requesting that they increase the sourcing of solar for their electricity to at least 20%. But PECO is trying to limit it to still 0.5%. And the fossil fuel industry would like to keep them at 0.5% because that allows them more of a market for their natural gas. I believe not enough people are aware of this restriction about community solar. And if more people knew about it, they would be demanding that their legislators vote for allowing community solar in our state. But I did mention that you can get individual solar on your own rooftop, but it costs a lot of money to buy those solar panels. So in comes a group called Solarize Philly, which actually has the interest of buying a group purchase of solar panels and then installing it individually on your home. This has worked very well in our city, because Solarize Philly is the largest group purchase solar panel program and home installation program in the United States, I'm told. And Philadelphia has actually incentivized this by actually offering a solar rebate of 20 cents for every watt that you buy. So depending on how many watts you buy, you could actually get a solar rebate. And this year, you could get a 26% tax credit for solar installations. Last year, it was 30%, which means that really the time to have done it was last year. But this year, it's 26%. Next year, it's 22%. And guess what? After that following year, it goes to 0%. So if you want to do solar installation, probably this is the time to do it. And then finally, I want to mention there's a group called Philadelphia Solar Energy Association, and they are dedicated to fighting for community solar. And if you're interested, you can look at their website and join them. Now, I want to mention that the mayor of Philadelphia has committed to 80% clean energy by the year 2050, and he is, through the Office of Sustainability, they have published this document about powering our future, a clean energy vision for Philadelphia. And in that actually lies the secret to what are the major health benefits of heat pumps. Because if you can run it on electricity and you can run it from carbon-free sources like wind and solar, then you can actually reduce air pollution. And in fact, everybody in the whole world were to stop, were to electrify everything and to source their electricity from carbon-free sources, we could basically eliminate air pollution, largely eliminate air pollution in the world. And in terms of the mayor's goal of actually getting to a carbon-free Philadelphia, they have put out a chart on how they plan to get to 2050 by reducing the carbon-free carbon footprint. And under the red arrow here, you can see that the biggest chunk of getting to carbon-free Philadelphia is to find a clean electricity supplier. That is to say, PECO. PECO has to get more of its electricity from renewable energy and clean sources, because that is the major bulk of how Philadelphia hopes to achieve an 80% reduction of their by the year 2050. So there's a lot of reason why we should be putting pressure on our state legislators to allow more clean renewable energy into our electricity mix. So again, the health benefits of heat pumps means that there's less air pollution, which means there's less particulate matter or soot in the air, which is tied to, of course, cardiovascular and respiratory illnesses. There's also less VOCs and nitrogen dioxides, which in the presence of sunlight causes ozone. Ozone is a very powerful oxidizer, and it actually can cause respiratory damage. And of course, heat pumps also, like an air conditioner, can make a more comfortable indoor environment by also removing the humidity uh, and reducing the moisture and the chance of mold in your home, which also is one of the triggers for asthma. So these are all reasons why heat pumps can be, in large scales, be helpful for improving the health in your home and in our environment. But this goes then, of course, to the bigger picture of climate change. And on the left, you see actually a picture of our planet Earth. And it's always striking to me how thin our atmosphere is. I know from where we sit, we look up, it looks like it's several hundred miles up in the air. But in relative to the size of the planet itself, it's a very thin air barrier that we have that surrounds our Earth. And from that, all living things receive their oxygen. If we pollute that little thin atmosphere with carbon dioxide or methane, which are potent greenhouse gases, then the sun radiation actually gets trapped inside the atmosphere. And instead of actually going out, it bounces back and into the atmosphere and continues to heat up the planet, which is part of the reason why we are very interested in reducing the carbon footprint. So we know there are carbon producing things like coal, natural gas, gasoline and diesel, incinerators, even biomass in trees when we burn them. Like in the wintertime, a lot of us like to burn firewood. That also is producing carbon into our atmosphere. And of course, another that we don't talk too much about is animals. But ruminant animals like cows actually belch out a lot of methane, and that methane actually gets produced into the atmosphere. So we want to try to move away from carbon producing elements, and our own behaviors, our choices about our electricity sources, whether we burn firewood, what kind of food we eat, all that has some impact on our carbon footprint. We would like to encourage more non-carbon producing things like wind and solar, hydroelectric dams. One that I think actually needs to be blossomed more is tidal, because unlike wind and solar, where there's a lot of capricious changes on the presence of the sun or the wind, the tide always comes in and out 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And I think if we took more advantage of the tidal power, we could actually have a more dependable source of energy. That energy can actually be used to split hydrogen from water, and the hydrogen itself can be captured into cells. And when it's actually exploded, hydrogen is a very potent, probably even more potent than gasoline in terms of the amount of power that it can produce. That power can be trapped in hydrogen cells, and it's been put into trucks, cars, and trains, so that the future mass transit could actually be through hydrogen cells. And then finally, nuclear energy is a non-carbon producing source, and it would probably be the source of choice were not for the fact that A, they are very expensive to build, and B, we don't know what to do with this nuclear waste, which actually has its own inherent health problems and has half-lives that are measured in the 10,000 year range rather than, being gone after a year. So nuclear has its serious own problems in terms of its impact on health. But the extreme weather that we're seeing just this week alone with Hurricane Laura and with the California wildfires are going to be more and more prevalent. Think about the fact that we're something like 1.3 degrees of Fahrenheit above our historical records. And the Paris Accord says that we are limited to maybe 2 degrees centigrade. Well, we have this much hurricanes and this much wildfires, and we're not even halfway to 2 degrees centigrade, then my question is, what's it going to be like when we hit 2 degrees centigrade? And how many wildfires and hurricanes will we be experiencing across our planet? It will be a total disaster. So we really need to try to limit our goal to 1.5 degrees centigrade and even less than that if possible. So the urgency, as people have talked about climate change, is very real, and we need to take this seriously. And finally, I want to say that Philadelphia itself is not immune to climate change. Here's a map of Philadelphia, and if you look at the red areas along the waterfront, particularly around the Delaware River, Kensington, and the river wards, and in South Philadelphia, you can see that we're going to see some major changes in Philadelphia if we do not address climate change. So for example, in South Philadelphia, there's FDR Park, which looks like this today, but it will look like this in the year 2100. That our Navy Yard, which has just been rebuilt for industrial use, looks like this today, but it will look like this in the year 2100. Our airport, which we depend upon, looks like this today, but unfortunately for the airport planners, they built it right next to the Delaware River, and it's going to look like this by the year 2100. It will be impassable and unusable as an airport. And South Philadelphia today is the I-95 corridor is actually has going to have dramatic changes by the year 2100. So the water will start lapping up to the I-95 highway, and we're going to see major flooding perhaps along I-95. So it does raise the whole question of, can heat pumps save the world? Well, the answer, of course, is no. A lot more needs to be done, but it is a step. And as the great Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And I don't think he was thinking of heat pumps at the time that he said that, but I do think that it's one of the things that we can be doing to try to advance and make us have a more livable planet and to reduce air pollution and a healthier lifestyle. All right, that's my talk. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Very nice. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a question. We've got 2 separate zones for air conditioning. So we have 2 lots of compressors, 2 lots of air handlers. Would we need 2 heat pumps, or would we be able to bridge them across the 2 systems?
Do you have ducts in your house, you said, or not?
Yes, we do have ducts, but I say we have 2. With downstairs is one zone, and upstairs is a separate zone.
This is where I need to have an expert. You may need to have.
no,
Your HVAC, who's your HVAC backup there, Howard?
You may
Yeah, that's what I'm.
units, but
Yeah, that's what I have to find out. Would I need 2 heat pumps or 1 heat pump?
yeah.
oh, just one. We have above little. We have for many years. We have 1 heat pump. It's inside units in the basement. The outside one's out back. And we have 2 zones. We can heat or cool our upstairs independently from our downstairs with the same one. We can't heat one and cool the other, but we can set the separate temperatures upstairs and down, which we do all the time.
Yeah, we can set separate temperatures upstairs, down, but we actually have 2 different compressors, and we have 2 different air handlers. So the downstairs air conditioning and the upstairs air are completely separate.
Yeah, a lot of the new heat pumps are coming in with these the mini split handlers, where the compressors outside and the condenser is inside.
Sure.
Very, very simple install. That's different from if you already have ducts and handling. You have some different options there. But I'm looking at getting 2 compressors, each with 2 condenser heads. So I'll have 4 heads to go throughout my 3-story property in the next 6 weeks.
Why would you do that?
Why would I do that? Because then I can zone, and so each each compressor is smaller. Instead of having one huge one, I have two small ones.
Oh, you can tailor your needs and save money.
Yeah, yeah. I'm also leaving in my natural gas system, and that's as a backup because my heat pumps may or may not be able to take me through all the winter. But you know, I'll see how good they can do. It doesn't cost me anything to keep my, just turn off my natural gas furnace.
That's an idea.
Well, why doesn't Philadelphia have a choice of clean energy? I have total wind energy. I have for a long time. It's called Clean Choice Energy. They have one called Ethical Energy. There's a number of wind power companies available for us.
Yes, you do have that choice, and that's through what they call PA Power Switch, where you can actually choose your energy supplier, and you can choose one that's offers renewable energy, like you have with for wind energy. But what I'm saying is that if you wanted to actually buy buy part of a community solar plant, a farm itself. I don't know if it's cheaper to do it that way, but it may be. And then you can buy this, you can source the solar energy to the grid, and you own a share of that, if you will.
Yeah.
And that has some advantages because it may be cheaper than going through an electricity supplier, which has its own markup that it has.
Walter, there's one exception I wanted to just throw out because, yeah, there is current legislation being looked at in Harrisburg about microgrids and community solar and such. The one exception I know about is if one person owns two properties and both properties have a PICO account in the same name, then you can put solar on one and overproduce and feed both properties. So yeah. I don't know if that leaves us any little loophole. That'd be a lot of trouble to change ownership of different properties just for an electric bill. But that's if you're in that situation, it just proves that, hey, it's really just an accounting kind of thing, and it's not. There's no technical reason why we can't do this. If I lived here, my sister lived there, my brother lived there, we're all one big happy family. I've got the big sunny roof. It's really just an accounting formality that's holding us back. Some legislation.
That's a good point. Yes, but it's more expensive. Land is more expensive in Philadelphia. So if you can get land for cheap in Adams County, it might be actually a more cost-effective way of doing it. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that the city and Penn did a lot of due diligence before they decided that they wanted to site their solar farm so far away.
There's also the resiliency argument. My solar is going to have some battery storage locally, and that will, if the grid goes down, I'll have a little bit of battery storage. But now I've seen deals in other states where you can lease a lot of battery storage. You only get to use a little bit of it because your electric company is using the rest of it to load balance when, if someone else, if the grid goes down, your battery storage can feed, your 10 surrounding properties.
That's a good point. Yes. You know a lot about this, Tim. You've been reading about this, I can tell.
Yeah, Walter, I've been in on this. So, and I appreciated your list of resources that you put out there. And I just wanted to throw another one out, is that there's a lot of folks who are in on this conversation who are not professional installers. And so I work as a librarian, and there's a lot of just information navigating and finding out of options where you don't actually have to talk to, a licensed professional whose interest rests in selling you a system. you know, there's a lot of other people can help you navigate the generalities of the decision.
Right.
And learn those options. So that's a community group in West Philadelphia is doing that, kind of coaching one another about the options with some retired volunteers who are actually designing layouts that go one step beyond Google Project Sunroof or the National Renewable Energy Laboratories PV watts, where you can do a guesstimate of how many panels you get on your roof. But we have retired shop teachers and retiring Penn professor who will do something very accurate that you can take to a contractor and say, hey, I want to do this. And it kind of gets you a jump start on the process and can get you some very significant reductions in the overall cost of your job too.
That's great. Yeah.
So the tinkerers, I want to encourage. It's not that hard a problem. So it's.
Yeah, we have something like that out in Northwest Philadelphia too. We have a solar interest group out there too.
Good. Yeah, ours is mostly run off of a Facebook group called West Philly Solar.
Okay, great. So,
Walter, I learned a lot from your talk. Thank you. I could have used it 2 years ago when I replaced my gas-powered furnace and my electric air conditioner. So, but I really did learn a lot. I have a question about geothermal heat pumps. You mentioned that the pipes have to go down 300 to 400 feet where the temperature is stable. But my understanding is even 10, 15, 20 feet, the temperature does not change that much. So do you know why those pipes have to go down so far? I mean, could they get away with, 10, 20, 30 or 40 feet even?
well, the short answer is I don't know the answer to that question. That's a very fair question. My guess is that, it's really related to the way they have spec'd the system, and that they think that they need to have that depth to have the assurance that this temperature, the ground temperature, stays around 50 degrees. But I don't know for sure.
There are two kinds of ground source heat pump, and the deep bore, involves a big truck with a really high boom, kind of like what you see at a fracking site.
Right.
And they did this down at the Friends Center at 1515 Cherry, where they have like a dozen.
Right.
It's like a tube well. It costs about $15 a foot. And in Philly, they got to go down a couple hundred feet to get, to get that surface area of cooling off of a bore. The other way you do it is a field install, where you trench back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. There you go down about, I don't know if it's 8 or 12 feet, depends, something. But when I looked at it for my house, my backyard wasn't big enough and to do the whole house. But I have to wonder, I have the same question. Who asked that question? I have to, Ned, I have to wonder the same thing, because I noticed my basement, I have a half basement, windows on the upper half, but my basement is like 10 degrees cooler on the hottest day. Yeah. And I just wonder if I did trenching out my basement floor, wouldn't that give me, maybe I don't want to cool my whole house, but maybe I want to cool one floor. I'm already replacing my basement floor. I'm already 6 feet underground. What if I did another 3 feet of trench?
Right.
Their calculations, and they did it for this one house in West Philly at Drexel. That's where I pulled some with the field thing. And then you mentioned Equate, Walter. So if you know Daniel Hunter, he's doing a trench system in New Jersey right now.
Wow.
Gotta go, Walter. Thank you.
Well, thank you,
Bye,
Bob.
Bob.
Thank you, people.
Yeah.
Well, there are no other questions. I'm going to end this. If not, thank you, guys.
Thanks, Walter.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. That was very good. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Appreciate you coming.
Take care.
Okay. See ya.
Bye.
Ciao.